The Twilight Zone is one of my favorite shows of all time. From the very first episode of the series, I was captivated by Rod Serling's stories and the ways every episode left me thinking about its meanings and the events that played out within its 25-minute runtime. Some of my favorite episodes were I Shot an Arrow into the Air, The After Hours, Time Enough at Last, and What You Need. I always found it captivating that a show that aired in the 60s could have had such a profound effect on the type of media I consume alongside the media industry as a whole. But there is one episode that stuck out to me amongst all the rest and is the one that I still think about from time to time. That episode being The Monsters Are Due on Maple Street. Originally aired on March 4th, 1960, this episode of The Twilight Zone immediately cemented itself as one of the best in the series and was named one of the top 10 best episodes of the show in Time magazine. There was a remake of the episode in 2003 alongside a radio dramatization being featured in the mid 2000s as part of the Twilight Zone radio series. It was also the episode that inspired movies such as David Coep's The Trigger Effect and one of my personal favorite horror movies, Frank Darabont's The Mist. But today I want to discuss this episode because it relates to a topic that I've been fascinated by for several years now and one that I have mentioned numerous times on the channel, that subject being mass hysteria. Mass hysteria, by definition, is simply a constellation of symptoms suggestive of organic illness, but without an identified cause and a group of people with shared beliefs about the cause of the symptoms. Mass hysteria typically occurs in high-stress situations in confined areas such as schools or villages. Examples of mass hysteria are the Salem witch trials and the dancing plague of 1518. But with that out of the way, I will give a breakdown of the episode before discussing why I feel it symbolizes mass hysteria and what Rod Serling aimed to achieve with creating this episode. The Monsters Are Due on Maple Street opens up with a narration read by Rod Serling, to which he says,
Maple Street, USA. Late summer. A tree-lined little world of front porch gliders, barbecues, the laughter of children, and the bell of an ice cream vendor. At the sound of the roar and the flash of light, it will be precisely 6:43 p.m. on Maple Street. This is Maple Street on a late Saturday afternoon. Maple Street, in the last calm and reflective moment before the monsters came.
As the narration plays, we see your typical white picket fence American neighborhood when a sudden flash of light fills the screen, the residents of Maple Street looking up at it. They discuss amongst themselves what the light could be when the townspeople face the realization that their power went out. Alongside this, their cars won't start, leaving the homeowners confided to the neighborhood. One of the residents, Pete Van Horn, volunteers to walk over to Floral Street to see if it is affected by the outage. His neighbors, Steve Brand and Charlie Farnsworth, decide to go into town to investigate further, but Tommy, a neighborhood boy, urges them not to go. When they question Tommy for the reason behind his statement, Tommy claims that in a comic book he read recently, an event similar to this one had played out caused by invaders from Mars. Tommy further explains that the aliens came down to Earth disguised as a father, a mother, and two kids, and that their first step towards invasion was to cut the power to isolate the neighborhood. I like that they discredit him at first, but still show on their face that there is a sense that Tommy could possibly be right. However, their attention turns to Les Goodman when his car starts on its own after failing to do so, causing everyone to become suspicious of him. As they all gather, one woman brings up Les's late night spent standing in the garden looking up at the sky as if waiting or looking for something. Les, defending himself as a resident of Maple Street for 5 years, claims to suffer from insomnia and how some nights he likes to look up at the stars. Steve diffuses the situation, but the tensions are still high, to which I want to point out how funny it is to me that these people make insomnia sound like this unheard of illness that no one else in the world has. Like, These people were really after this guy because in the next scene, it's nighttime and everyone is watching this poor man's house like they're the ATF from the early 90s. Some bickering ensues in which a neighbor by the name of Don points out a strange radio set, Charlie adding that he had never seen such a thing before. Steve's wife tries to explain that it's simply a ham radio set, but arguing continues to escalate. Suddenly, an echoing of footsteps occurs, causing everyone to go silent. Out in the distance, bathed in darkness, is the silhouette of a man walking towards the crowd. Terrified, Don hastily grabs the shotgun and claims that it's for protection before Steve confiscates it from him. Out of panic, though, Charlie snatches the gun from Steve and shoots the silhouetted figure, the crowd approaching with curiosity. But as they saw the monster, a grave revelation struck them as they realized Charlie had shot Pete Van Hahn, the man who went to Floral Street. Out of panic, Charlie tries to explain his way out of the situation, but with tension at an all-time high, the group of people turns into a mob. The mob begins attacking Charlie before directing their aggression onto Tommy, the kid who suggested the idea that there were aliens, and from there, the mob devolves into chaos, the episode seemingly ending in violence. But rather, the scene pans out to reveal two human-like entities standing atop a hill with a UFO behind them. I'm not even gonna lie, when I first watched this in middle school, my mind was blown. Like, oh my god, it was actually aliens. Tommy was right the whole time, dude. It was aliens. It is revealed that the aliens were the ones controlling the power and how doing something as simple as changing a routine could cause chaos, such as the example lying before their eyes. And as they leave the planet in their UFO, Rod Serling ends the episode by narrating,
The tools of conquest do not necessarily come with bombs and explosions and fallout. There are weapons that are simply thoughts, attitudes, prejudices, to be found only in the minds of men. For the record, prejudices can kill, and suspicion can destroy. And a thoughtless, frightened search for a scapegoat has a fallout all of its own. For the children, and the children yet unborn. And the pity of it is that these things cannot be confined.
wow. Even now, as I'm simply explaining the key plot points of the episode, I can't help but sit here in awe at how expertly written this episode felt, and how even after 6 or 7 years since watching it for the first time, it still fascinates me. But now, how does this episode relate back to the topic of mass hysteria that I brought up before? Well, as I explained earlier in the video, the key ingredients for mass hysteria to take place are high stress situations, and for those involved to be inside a confined space or area. With the residents of Maple Street all losing power at the same time, alongside the fact that their cars won't start, so therefore they are confined to their neighborhood, helps to set up the eventual chaos that will play out by the end of the episode. And with Tommy suggesting that their neighbors might possibly be aliens, paranoia begins to seep into the crowd almost immediately. And in a way, I like that the characters, more specifically Steve, seem to be self-aware of the fact that they are developing a mob within the community, but with the ever-growing stress of the situation, it seems as though their minds start to forget rationality and begins to search for answers to the problems at hand. But with all this talk about the episode of Mass Hysteria, it almost reminds me of As many of you who have watched this episode or admire Rod Serling's work may know, this episode is actually supposed to be a loose metaphor and commentary on McCarthyism and the Second Red Scare as a whole. One of the most famous and relatively modern examples of mass hysteria, the Second Red Scare occurred after World War II and is also known as McCarthyism after its best known advocate, Senator Joseph McCarthy. McCarthyism coincided with an increased and widespread fear of communist espionage that was consequent of the increasing tension in the Cold War through the Soviet occupation of Eastern Europe, the Berlin blockade, the end of the Chinese Civil War, the confessions of spying for the Soviet Union that were made by several high-ranking US government officials, and the outbreak of the Korean War. So pretty much imagine it as a 1950s form of Twitter. Of course, There is a lot that played into the second Red Scare that I won't discuss in this video today, but during that time, the fear of communism swept the nation like a wildfire. And, similar to the events of the episode, those who were branded as communist sympathizers faced a lot of backlash and lost their careers and livelihoods because of the overwhelming mob mentality of the nation towards communism as a whole. Of course, the actual number of communist spies was far fewer than the number of people who were branded as spies, but at that point in time, it didn't really matter. And we can actually see this taking place in this episode of the Twilight Zone when the mob claims that Les Goodman could possibly be the alien because of his car strangely starting and the fact that he likes to stargaze. But suffice all this to say, I believe that the episode The Monsters Are Due on Maple Street is one of the best depictions of mass hysteria and how it starts. Thank you all for watching this video. Alongside having a fascination with the Twilight Zone, I'm also fascinated by mass hysteria and will make more videos on the topic intermittently. But if there's anything you found interesting that you'd like to add, please do so in the comments below. But for now, I hope you all have a great rest of your day, night, morning, afternoon, whatever time it is, and I will see you all in the next one.